We're back from the State House now with Massachusetts State Senate Minority Leader Bruce Tarr. Senator Tarr, welcome back on this pre-storm day, and how are you?
I'm doing okay, Rick. Thanks. It's always good to be on the air with you. And it is interesting when we look at the storm that's coming. And I know that we could both speculate about what's going to happen, but because we both lived in New England for a long time, we know that nobody really knows what exactly is going to happen.
That's the truth. And for the most part, we're all resilient enough and have been through it enough to say, okay, whatever comes, comes, and we'll deal with it. All
Exactly
right.
right.
It's been a while since we've chatted, and I guess one of the impending questions, as always, it seems to be never ending, as a matter of fact, is the state of the state budget.
Well, it is never ending, Rick, and it's become a lot more challenging over the last several months. Usually we watch the budget, we're watching revenue collections. As you know, we begin to develop the state budget for the coming fiscal year at the beginning of that calendar year. So the current state budget is authorized until the end of June. The beginning of July is when we begin the new fiscal year. But we are in the process right now of developing the budget for the new fiscal year, which will be fiscal year 2025. And the governor began that process back in January by filing her proposal for the budget. But since that time, Rick, there's a lot that's been happening and a lot of concerning things that have been happening. So it's been identified that obviously our revenue collections are not nearly as robust as they have been over the last several years. And that triggered the governor, along with the House and Senate Committee on Ways and Means, to revise our projected revenue estimate, the figure that everyone works off of to write the budget, to revise it downward by $1 billion. And so the governor used her 9C powers to reduce the budget by about $375 million with a series of unilateral cuts. And then she had to find another $600+ million in fixes, trying to identify other sources of revenue, other savings, and things like Medicaid to be able to balance the budget. But the problem is, Rick, even with that downgrade of $1 billion of the number that we're all working from, we saw in January revenue continued to decline. So we, even after the revision of the benchmark, we came in at about $268 million, or actually $263 million. I'm looking because I want to make sure I get this number right. So we're about $263 million, or 6.8% below what the benchmark would have dictated for January. So it's cause for concern because the reduction of $1 billion was a major reduction, but now we're continuing to see revenue not coming in at the pace at which it had been projected. So we're going to have to watch that for two reasons. Number one, we've got to get through the end of this fiscal year, through the end of June, and to do so with a balanced budget, which is constitutionally required. But number two, we've got to take all of this into account when developing the budget for the coming fiscal year. And the governor's proposal came before that benchmark was adjusted. So the House and Senate Committees on Ways and Means are going to have to figure out the right path forward, knowing what we know now that wasn't available for information when the House 2, the governor's proposal, was put forward. So it's very complicated, Rick, and there's a lot to be concerned about.
So a bake sale won't do it.
It will not. Unfortunately, one of the things that, and we've talked about this a lot, legislators will earmark the budget for particular local priorities, and the governor reduced those earmarks. She didn't eliminate them. She reduced them by 50%. So a lot of important local priorities got cut in half, and that did not produce a lot of savings. It produced some savings, but we've still got a long way to go, and we've got some critical months ahead to try to get to the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, well, as they say, stay tuned. All right, I know that we have a limited time today, and what else is on your agenda, Senator, that you want to mention?
So I want to preview for you legislation that we're going to be filing in the next several days, which has to do with abandoned fishing gear. So you and I, coming from Cape Ann, we know the importance of fishing gear, and we know it's important that it be protected as private property. But the last thing we would ever entertain is someone molesting somebody's lobster traps, for instance. That is a very serious crime in a coastal community. The problem is our current laws treat all of the gear as private property, even when it's abandoned or lost or unclaimed. And so that creates a situation where you have abandoned gear rolling around on the ocean floor, presenting a threat, particularly to right whales, of entanglement. And that gear ghost fishes. It's killing fish. It's taking lobsters that are never going to be harvested and never going to be eaten. It rolls up on the shore, and we have to take it off of our beaches where it's pollution. And so we've been working with the Division of Marine Fisheries and other legislators to come up with legislation that will allow DMF to create rules that will allow abandoned gear to be removed from the ocean while still protecting private property rights. So that's a needle that needs to be threaded. We're working on that. We're going to have some news for you about a bill very soon.
I'm just wondering, my dad, when he was lobstering, sometimes his lines were cut, the buoy lines were cut, and so the lobster gear, the traps were lost at the bottom of the ocean. And it was a significant amount of money, over the course of years. If that stuff were to be recovered, is there any possibility of sort of like a repository, sort of like Bill Galvin's thing, where you unclaimed money, you can look at that? Would there be anything like that?
Well, there could be. In fact, Division of Marine Fisheries has been researching best practices all around the country because other states, particularly on the West Coast, have enacted abandoned gear legislation. And so there could be that kind of repository. The difficulty is identifying the gear and identifying the owner. So that is going to need to be the subject of regulation, which is developed through a public process. But the most important thing right now is to find a way to get the gear out of the water where
Right.
it's doing a lot of damage and could potentially have a very negative impact on right whales, which, as we know, are an endangered species.
Well, I know my dad tried to put his his buoy number on all of his traps, but that's not always feasible, especially with metal traps. So how do you identify who owns them? Okay, final question out of left field, Senator. I promise to be brief. My old friend who helped MSO on the map, just as you have, Kim Driscoll, was the former mayor of Salem, and she's lieutenant governor now. How is she doing on the Hill? Do you have interaction with the lieutenant governor?
I have some interaction, but I think her most significant interactions, Rick, are actually with municipal officials. The lieutenant governor has stepped into the role, as her predecessor did, of working with all of the municipalities. And obviously, she has great insight and expertise in that area. And she's been able to work with municipalities all across the state. And so in that role, I think she has definitely added to the operations of the administration.